Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind troubled with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems. The ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve while rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Let my voice wash over you at a comfortable volume and allow yourself to be distracted from the stresses and worries that play on your mind. Whether you need help falling asleep or going back to sleep in the middle of the night, you can trust me to keep you company and help you to wake up tomorrow in a rested state. You may need to try out Sleepy Time Tales for a few nights to get used to the slightly strange idea, but I believe it will be well worth your while. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So settle down, relax, and allow yourself to get lost in my telling of tonight's story. Before we get on with tonight's reading, I'd like to ask for a few minutes of your time. Sleepy Time Tales is a listener-supported podcast. I can only keep it going, paying for the services and tools I use, and justify the time that I spend on it, thanks to the generosity of listeners like you. If you're finding Sleepy Time Tales useful, if it helps you to get a restful night, and you would like to help keep it going out to thousands of insomniacs, just like you, and you have the means to help, please consider supporting it on the Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. This is monthly support that not only helps me keep the lights on, but gets you fun bonuses based on your contribution level. So go along there, take a look, and sign up if you're willing and interested. If monthly seems a big ask, which is understandable, you can make once-off tips to the tip jar on the website. And if you would like to support Sleepy Time Tales without having to do so financially, you can just tell people about it. Whether in person or on social media, if you think people will benefit from listening to Sleepy Time Tales, just let them know. And that's enough of that. Let's get back to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, where things are starting to get exciting. We return this week to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. Chapter 4. Ned Land. Captain Farragut was a good seaman, worthy of the frigates he commanded. His vessel and he were one. He was the soul of it. On the question of the cetacean there was no doubt in his mind, and he would not allow the existence of the animal to be disputed on board. He believed in it as certain good women believe in the Leviathan, by faith, not by reason. The monster did exist, and he had sworn to rid the seas of it. He was a kind of knight of Rhodes, a second to Don de Gozon, going to meet the serpent which desolated the island. Either Captain Farragut would kill the Narwhal, or the Narwhal would kill the captain. There was no third course. The officers on board shared the opinion of their chief. They were ever chatting, discussing, and calculating the various chances of a meeting, watching narrowly the vast surface of the ocean. More than one took up his quarters voluntarily in the cross trees, who would have cursed such a berth under any other circumstances. As long as the sun described its daily course, the rigging was crowded with sailors, whose feet were burnt to such an extent by the heat of the deck as to render it unbearable. Still, the Abraham Lincoln had not yet breasted the suspected waters of the Pacific. As to the ship's company, they desired nothing better than to meet the Unicorn, to harpoon it, to hoist it on board and dispatch it. They watched the sea with eager attention. Besides, Captain Farragut had spoken of a certain sum of $2,000, set apart for whoever should first sight the monster, were he cabin boy, common seaman, or officer. I leave you to judge how eyes were used on board the Abraham Lincoln. For my own part, I was not behind the others, and left to no one my share of daily observations. The frigate might have been called the Argus for 100 reasons. Only one amongst us, Conseil, seemed to protest by his indifference against the question which so interested us all, and he seemed to be out of keeping with the general enthusiasm on board. I have said that Captain Farragut had carefully provided his ship with every apparatus for catching the giant cetacean. No whaler had ever been better armed. We possessed every known engine, from the harpoon thrown by the hand to the barbed arrows of the blunderbuss, and the explosive balls of the duck gun. On the forecastle lay the perfection of a breech-loading gun, very thick at the breech and very narrow in the bore, the model of which had been in the exhibition of 1867. This precious weapon of American origin could throw with ease a conical projectile of 9 pounds to a mean distance of 10 miles. Thus the Abraham Lincoln wanted for no means of destruction. And, what was better still, she had on board Ned Land, the prince of harpooners. Ned Land was a Canadian with an uncommon quickness of hand, and who knew no equal in his dangerous occupation. Skill, coolness, audacity, and cunning he possessed in a superior degree, and it must be a cunning whale or a singularly cute cachalot to escape the stroke of his harpoon. Ned Land was about 40 years of age. He was a tall man, more than 6 feet high, strongly built, grave and taciturn, occasionally violent and very passionate when contradicted. His person attracted attention, but above all the boldness of his look, which gave a singular expression to his face. Who calls himself Canadian calls himself French, and little communicative as Ned Land was, I must admit that he took a certain liking for me. My nationality drew him to me, no doubt. It was an opportunity for him to talk, and for me to hear the old language of Rabelais, which is still used in some Canadian provinces. The harpooner's family was originally from Quebec, and was already a tribe of hardy fishermen when this town belonged to France. Little by little Ned Land acquired a taste for chatting, and I loved to hear the recital of his adventures in the polar seas. He related his fishing and his combats with natural poetry of expression. His recital took the form of an epic poem, and I seemed to be listening to a Canadian Homer singing the Iliad of the regions of the north. I am portraying this hardy companion as I really knew him. We are old friends now, united in that unchangeable friendship which is born and cemented amidst extreme dangers. Ah, brave Ned, I ask no more than to live 100 years longer, that I may have more time to dwell the longer on your memory. Now, what was Ned Land's opinion on the question of the marine monster? I must admit that he did not believe in the unicorn, and was the only one on board who did not share that universal conviction. He even avoided the subject, which I one day thought it my duty to press upon him. One magnificent evening, the 30th of July, that is to say 3 weeks after our departure, the frigate was abreast of Cape Blanc, 30 miles to leeward of the coast of Patagonia. We had crossed the Tropic of Capricorn, and the Straits of Magellan opened less than 700 miles to the south. Before 8 days were over, the Abraham Lincoln would be plowing the waters of the Pacific. Seated on the poop, Ned Land and I were chatting of one thing and another as we looked at this mysterious sea, whose great depths had up to this time been inaccessible to the eyes of man. I naturally led up the conversation to the giant unicorn, and examined the various chances of success or failure of the expedition. But seeing that Ned Land let me speak without saying too much himself, I pressed him more closely. "Well, Ned," said I, "is it possible that you are not convinced of the existence of the cetacean that we are following? Have you any particular reason for being so incredulous?" The harpooner looked at me fixedly for some moments before answering, struck his broad forehead with his hand, a habit of his, as if to collect himself, and said at last, "Perhaps I have, Mr. Aronnax. But Ned, you, a whaler by profession, familiarized with all the great marine mammalia, you whose imagination might easily accept the hypothesis of enormous cetaceans, you ought to be the last to doubt under such circumstances." "That is what deceives you, Professor," replied Ned. "That the vulgar should believe in extraordinary comets traversing space, and in the existence of antediluvian monsters in the heart of the globe, may well be. But neither astronomer nor geologist believes in such chimeras. As a whaler, I have followed many a cetacean, harpooned a great number, and killed several. But however strong or well armed they may have been, neither their tails nor their weapons would have been able to even scratch the iron plates of a steamer." "But Ned, they tell of ships which the teeth of Narwhal have pierced through and through." "Wooden ships, that is possible," replied the Canadian. "But I've never seen it done. And until further proof, I deny that whales, cetaceans, or sea unicorns could ever produce the effect you describe." "Well, Ned," I repeated with a conviction resting on the logic of facts, "I believe in the existence of a mammal, powerfully organized, belonging to the branch of vertebrata, like the whales, the cachalots, or the dolphins, and furnished with a horn of defense of great penetrating power." "Hum," said the harpooner, shaking his head with the air of a man who would not be convinced. "Notice one thing, my worthy Canadian," I resumed. "If such an animal is in existence, if it inhabits the depths of the ocean, if it frequents the strata lying miles below the surface of the water, it must necessarily possess an organization the strength of which would defy all comparison." "And why this powerful organization?" demanded Ned. "Because it requires incalculable strength to keep oneself in these strata and resist their pressure. Listen to me. Let us admit that the pressure of the atmosphere is represented by the weight of a column of water 32 feet high. In reality, the column of water would be shorter, as we are speaking of seawater, the density of which is greater than that of fresh water. Very well, when you dive, Ned, as many times 32 feet of water as there are above you, so many times does your body bear a pressure equal to that of the atmosphere. That is to say, 15 pounds for each square inch of its surface. It follows then that at 320 feet, this pressure is that of 10 atmospheres, of 100 atmospheres at 3,200 feet, and of 1,000 atmospheres at 32,000 feet. That is about 6 miles, which is equivalent to saying that if you could attain this depth in the ocean, each square 3/8 of an inch of the surface of your body would bear a pressure of 5,600 pounds. Ah, my brave Ned, do you know how many square inches you carry on the surface of your body?" "I have no idea, Mr. Aronnax." "About 6,500. As in reality the atmospheric pressure is about 15 pounds to the square inch, your 6,500 square inches bear at this moment a pressure of 97,500 pounds. Without my perceiving it. Without your perceiving it. And if you are not crushed by such a pressure, it is because the air penetrates the interior of your body with equal pressure. Hence perfect equilibrium between the interior and exterior pressure, which thus neutralize each other, and which allow you to bear it without inconvenience. But in the water it is another thing. Yes, I understand, replied Ned, becoming more attentive. Because the water surrounds me but does not penetrate. Precisely, Ned. So that at 32 feet below the surface of the sea, you would undergo a pressure of 97,500 pounds. At 320 feet, 10 times that pressure. At 3,200 feet, 100 times that pressure. Lastly, at 32,000 feet, 1,000 times that pressure would be 97,500,000 pounds. That is to say that you would be flattened as if you had been drawn from the plates of a hydraulic machine. The devil, exclaimed Ned. Very well, my worthy harpooner. If some vertebrate, several hundred yards long and large in proportion, can maintain itself in such depths, of those whose surface is represented by millions of square inches, that is by tens of millions of pounds, we must estimate the pressure they undergo. Consider then what must be the resistance of their bony structure, and the strength of their organization to withstand such pressure. Why, exclaimed Ned Land, they must be made of iron plates 8 inches thick, like the armored frigates. As you say, Ned, and think what destruction such a mass would cause if hurled with the speed of an express train against the hull of a vessel. Yes, certainly, perhaps, replied the Canadian, shaken by these figures but not yet willing to give in. Well, have I convinced you? You have convinced me of one thing, sir, which is that, if such animals do exist at the bottom of the seas, they must necessarily be as strong as you say. But if they do not exist, mine obstinate harpooner, how explain the accident to the Scotia? Chapter 5. At a Venture. The voyage of the Abraham Lincoln was for a long time marked by no special incident. But one circumstance happened which showed the wonderful dexterity of Ned Land, and proved what confidence we might place in him. The 30th of June, the frigate spoke some American whalers, from whom we learned that they knew nothing about the Narwhal. But one of them, the captain of the Monroe, knowing that Ned Land had shipped on board the Abraham Lincoln, begged for his help in chasing a whale they had in sight. Commander Farragut, desirous of seeing Ned Land at work, gave him permission to go on board the Monroe. And fate served our Canadian so well that instead of one whale, he harpooned 2 with a double blow, striking one straight to the heart and catching the other after some minutes' pursuit. Decidedly, if the monster ever had to do with Ned Land's harpoon, I would not bet in its favor. The frigate skirted the southeast coast of America with great rapidity. The 3rd of July we were at the opening of the Straits of Magellan, level with Cape Verges. But Commander Farragut would not take a tortuous passage, but doubled Cape Horn. The ship's crew agreed with him, and certainly it was possible that they might meet the Narwhal in this narrow pass. Many of the sailors affirmed that the monster could not pass there, that he was too big for that. The 6th of July, about 3 in the afternoon, the Abraham Lincoln, at 15 miles to the south, doubled the solitary island. This lost rock at the extremity of the American continent, to which some Dutch sailors gave the name of their native town, Cape Horn. The course was taken toward the northwest, and the next day the screw of the frigate was at last beating the waters of the Pacific. "Keep your eyes open," called out the sailors. And they were opened widely. Both eyes and glasses, a little dazzled, it is true, by the prospect of $2,000, had not an instant's repose. Day and night they watched the surface of the ocean, and even nyctalopes, whose faculty of seeing in the darkness multiplies their chances 100-fold, would have had enough to do to gain the prize. I myself, for whom money had no charms, was not the least attentive on board. Giving but few minutes to my meals, but a few hours to sleep, indifferent to either rain or sunshine, I did not leave the poop of the vessel. Now leaning in the netting of the forecastle, now on the taffrail, I devoured with eagerness the soft foam which whitened the sea as far as the eye could reach. And how often I shared the emotion of the majority of the crew, when some capricious whale raised its black back above the waves. The poop of the vessel was crowded in a moment. The cabins poured forth a torrent of sailors and officers, each with heaving breast and troubled eyes watching the course of the cetacean. I looked and looked till I was nearly blind, whilst Conseil, always phlegmatic, kept repeating in a calm voice, "If, sir, you would not squint so much, you would see better." But vain excitement. The Abraham Lincoln checked its speed and made for the animal signaled, a simple whale, or common cachalot, which soon disappeared amidst a storm of execration. But the weather was good. The voyage was being accomplished under the most favorable auspices. It was then the bad season in Australia, the July of that zone corresponding to our January in Europe. But the sea was beautiful and easily scanned around a vast circumference. The 20th of July, the Tropic of Capricorn was cut by 105 degrees of longitude, and the 27th of the same month, we crossed the equator on the 110th meridian. This past, the frigate took a more decided westerly direction and scoured the central waters of the Pacific. Commander Farragut thought, and with reason, that it was better to remain in deep water and keep clear of continents or islands, which the beast itself seemed to shun. Perhaps because there was not enough water for him, suggested the greater part of the crew. The frigate passed at some distance from the Marquesas and the Sandwich Islands, crossed the Tropic of Cancer and made for the China Seas. We were on the theatre of the last diversions of the monster, and to say truth, we no longer lived on board. Hearts palpitated, fearfully preparing themselves for future incurable aneurysm. The entire ship's crew was undergoing a nervous excitement, of which I can give no idea. They could not eat, they could not sleep. 20 times a day a misconception or an optical illusion of some sailor seated on the taffrail would cause dreadful perspirations, and these emotions, 20 times repeated, kept us in a state of excitement so violent that a reaction was unavoidable. And truly, reaction soon showed itself. For 3 months, during which a day seemed an age, the Abraham Lincoln furrowed all the waters of the northern Pacific, running at whales, making sharp deviations from her course, veering suddenly from one tack to another, stopping suddenly, putting on steam and bucking ever and anon at the risk of deranging her machinery. And not one point of the Japanese or American coast was left unexplored. The warmest partisans of the enterprise now became its most ardent detractors. Reaction mounted from the crew to the captain himself, and certainly had it not been for resolute determination on the part of Captain Farragut, the frigate would have headed due southward. This useless search could not last much longer. The Abraham Lincoln had nothing to reproach herself with. She had done her best to succeed. Never had an American ship's crew shown more zeal or patience. Its failure could not be placed to their charge. There remained nothing but to return. This was represented to the commander. The sailors could not hide their discontent, and the service suffered. I will not say there was a mutiny on board, but after a reasonable period of obstinacy, Captain Farragut, as Columbus did, asked for 3 days' patience. If in 3 days the monster did not appear, the man at the helm should give 3 turns of the wheel, and Abraham Lincoln would make for the European seas. This promise was made on the 2nd of November. It had the effect of rallying the ship's crew. The sea was watched with renewed attention. Each one wished for a last glance in which to sum up his remembrance. Glasses were used with feverish activity. It was a grand defiance given to the giant Narwhal, and he could scarcely fail to answer the summons and appear. 2 days passed. The steam was at half pressure. 1,000 schemes were tried to attract the attention and stimulate the apathy of the animal in case it would be met in these parts. Large quantities of bacon were trailed in the wake of the ship, to the great satisfaction, I must say, of the sharks. Small craft radiated in all directions round the Abraham Lincoln as she lay to, and did not leave a spot of the sea unexplored. But the night of the 4th of November arrived without the unveiling of this submarine mystery. The next day, the 5th of November, at 12, the delay would, morally speaking, expire. After that time, Commander Farragut, faithful to his promise, was to turn the course to the southeast and abandon forever the northern regions of the Pacific. The frigate then was in 31 degrees 15 minutes north latitude and 136 degrees 42 minutes east longitude. The coast of Japan still remained less than 200 miles to leeward. Night was approaching. They just struck 8 bells. Large clouds veiled the face of the moon, then in its first quarter. The sea undulated peaceably under the stern of the vessel. At that moment I was leaning forward on the starboard netting. Conseil, standing near me, was looking straight before him. The crew, perched in the ratlines, examined the horizon, which contracted and darkened by degrees. Officers with their night glasses scoured the growing darkness. Sometimes the ocean sparkled under the rays of the moon, which darted between 2 clouds. Then all trace of light was lost in the darkness. And looking at Conseil, I could see that he was undergoing a little of the general influence. At least I thought so. Perhaps for the first time his nerves vibrated to a sentiment of curiosity. "Come, Conseil," said I. "This is the last chance of pocketing the $2,000. "May I be permitted to say, sir," replied Conseil, "that I never reckoned on getting the prize. And had the government of the Union offered $100,000, I would have been none the poorer." "You're right, Conseil. It is a foolish affair after all, and one upon which we enter too lightly. What time lost, what useless emotions. We should have been back in France 6 months ago." "In your little room, sir," replied Conseil, "and in your museum, sir. And I should have already classed all your fossils, sir. And the Babirusa would have been installed in its cage in the Jardin des Plantes, and have drawn all the curious people of the capital." "As you say, Conseil, I fancy we shall run a fair chance of being laughed at for our pains." "That's tolerably certain," replied Conseil quietly. I think they will make fun of you, sir. And must I say it? Go on, my good friend. Well, sir, you will only get your deserts. Indeed. When one has the honor of being as savant as you are, sir, one should not expose oneself to. Conseil had no time to finish his compliment. In the midst of general silence, a voice had just been heard. It was the voice of Ned Land shouting, "Look out there, the very thing we are looking for, on our weather beam." Chapter 6. At Full Steam. At this cry, the whole ships hurried to the harpooner. Commander, officers, masters, sailors, cabin boys. Even the engineers left their engines and the stokers their furnaces. The order to stop her had been given, and the frigate now simply went on by her own momentum. The darkness was then profound, and however good the Canadian's eyes were, I asked myself how he had managed to see and what he had been able to see. My heart beat as if it would break. But Ned Land was not mistaken, and we all perceived the object he pointed to. At 2 cables' length from the Abraham Lincoln, on the starboard quarter, the sea seemed to be illuminated all over. It was not a mere phosphoric phenomenon. The monster emerged some fathoms from the water and then threw out the very intense but inexplicable light mentioned in the reports of several captains. This magnificent irradiation must have been produced by an agent of great, shining power. The luminous part traced on the sea an immense oval, much elongated, the center of which condensed a burning heat, whose overpowering brilliancy died out by successive gradations. "It is only an agglomeration of phosphoric particles," cried one of the officers. "No, sir, certainly not," I replied. "Never did folades or salpay produce such a powerful light. That brightness is of an essentially electrical nature. Besides, see, it moves. It is moving forwards, backwards, it is darting towards us." A general cry rose from the frigate. "Silence," said the captain. "Up with the helm, reverse the engines." The steam was shut off and the Abraham Lincoln, beating to port, described a semicircle. "Right the helm, go ahead," cried the captain. These orders were executed. The frigate moved rapidly from the burning light. I was mistaken. She tried to sheer off, but the supernatural animal approached with a velocity double our own. We gasped for breath. Stupefaction more than fear made us dumb and motionless. The animal gained on us, sporting with the waves. It made the round of the frigate, which was then making 14 knots, and enveloped it with its electric rings like luminous dust. Then it moved away 2 or 3 miles, leaving a phosphorescent track, like those volumes of steam that the express trains leave behind. All at once, from the dark line of the horizon, whither it retired to gain its momentum, the monster rushed suddenly towards the Abraham Lincoln, with alarming rapidity, stopped suddenly about 20 feet from the hull and died out. Not diving under the water, for its brilliancy did not abate, but suddenly, and as if the source of this brilliant emanation was exhausted. Then it reappeared on the other side of the vessel, as if it had turned and slid under the hull. Any moment a collision might have occurred which would have been fatal to us. However, I was astonished at the maneuvers of the frigate. She fled and did not attack. On the captain's face, generally so impassive, was an expression of unaccountable astonishment. "Mr. Aronnax," he said, "I do not know with what formidable being I have to deal, and I will not imprudently risk my frigate in the midst of this darkness. Besides, how to attack this unknown thing, how defend oneself from it. Wait for daylight and the scene will change. You have no further doubt, Captain, of the nature of the animal. No, sir. It is evidently a gigantic narwhal and an electric one. Perhaps, added I, one can only approach it with a gymnotus or a torpedo. Undoubtedly, replied the captain. If it possesses such dreadful power, it is the most terrible animal that ever was created. That is why, sir, I must be on my guard. The crew were on their feet all night. No one thought of sleep. The Abraham Lincoln, not being able to struggle with such velocity, had moderated its pace and sailed at half speed. For its part, the Narwhal, imitating the frigate, let the waves rocket at will, and seemed decided not to leave the scene of the struggle. Towards midnight, however, it disappeared, or, to use a more appropriate term, it died out like a large glowworm. Had it fled? One could only fear, not hope. But at 7 minutes to 1 o'clock in the morning, a deafening whistling was heard, like that produced by a body of water rushing with great violence. The captain, Ned Land, and I were then on the poop, eagerly peering through the profound darkness. Ned Land asked the commander, "You have often heard the roaring of whales?" "Often, sir, but never such whales the sight of which brought me in $2,000, if I can only approach within 4 harpoon lengths of it." "But to approach it," said the commander, "I ought to put a whaler at your disposal." "Certainly, sir. That will be trifling with the lives of my men." "And mine too," simply said the harpooner. Towards 2 o'clock in the morning, the burning light reappeared, not less intense, about 5 miles to windward of the Abraham Lincoln. Notwithstanding the distance and the noise of this wind and sea, one heard distinctly the loud strokes of the animal's tail, and even its panting breath. It seemed that, at the moment that the enormous narwhal had come to take breath at the surface of the water, the air was engulfed in its lungs, like the steam in the vast cylinders of a machine with 2,000 horsepower. Thought I. A whale with the strength of a cavalry regiment would be a pretty whale. And I think I'm going to leave it there. As always, if you want to pick up where I'm leaving off, you can find the original on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepytime Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to follow or subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. Good night and sweet dreams.